from the heart of rural France. This is the Keto Woman podcast, brought to you by me. Hello Keto lovelies, I'm Daisy Brackenhall, and I've spent most of my life struggling with my weight and confidence, and have always had a difficult relationship with food. Even when I finally got to my target weight, after weight loss surgery and eating low carb, I couldn't maintain it and I was miserable. I've been keto now for over 2 years, and it has given me the freedom to fall in love with food again, without the constant gain, loss, guilt, virtue cycle of before. Health and happiness is where it's at now, running on fat. Welcome to the Keto Woman podcast. Each week I'll be chatting to inspirational women, maybe even the odd man, to discover the secrets to their success so that I can share them with you. So what is keto? Keto is a way of eating that enables you to switch your body's main fuel source from sugar to fat. Who doesn't want to be a fat burner, right? But how do we achieve this? A great place to start is by keeping carbs under 20 grams a day. So things like leafy greens and above ground vegetables, plus some nuts and seeds and the incidental carbs you find in things like full fat dairy. Choose delicious fatty proteins and be free and easy with oily dressings on salad and butter on your veggies. Once you're in the swing of things, you can tweak it to suit you. Make your own personalized keto. You'll hear all sorts of ways to keto from my guests. There is no one way to do keto, no one size fits all. I hope to show you just how flexible and fabulous this way of eating can be. I'm not a doctor, and most of my guests won't be either, so we really can't give you medical advice. It's always best to consult your own doctor when making big changes to your diet and lifestyle, because they know you and your medical history, and so have access to the bigger picture. Wouldn't it be helpful to have one place where you could find all the links? Want to sign up to my new Patreon exclusive Facebook group, Daisy's Lovelies? No problem. How about subscribing to my YouTube channel? Please help me notch up my first 1,000 subscribers by going to links.ketowomanpodcast.com and following the YouTube link. Not following me on Instagram yet? Hit the Instagram button. You get the idea. All the buttons, all the links you need are at links.ketowomanpodcast.com. Welcome to episode number 177, where I'm joined by extraordinary woman Kelly LeBlanc. Kelly and I recorded last year, and her episodes have languished, ready to be edited all this time. Well, finally I got my act together, and this week is the first of 2 parts. I say got my act together, I still haven't got it together enough to redo the intro, but I will, because clearly I am no longer in rural France. Kelly is 47 years old and grew up in a small French community on the east coast of Canada called Camp. She moved to the US in 1996 after being recruited by a consulting company to work on Y2K projects. She went on to travel all over the US and Mexico for work and education, which led her to Pfizer in Connecticut, where she met her now husband of 22 years. Apparently, Mike loves to tell the story of how she seduced him. And apparently it's true, she did. Kelly and Mike have 2 beautiful feline boys. They rescue cats with special needs, as they tend to linger a long time in shelters, regardless of how loving they are. And they are all currently living in the Austin area, where they are learning to live without seasons, it's always hot, and allergies. But apparently the conveniences make up for it, and the opportunities are amazing. Kelly currently works as a DevOps manager and manages a small team of 3 who are responsible for managing over 50 applications, with a focus on creating high-performance teams. Kelly has had weight challenges her entire life and tried everything. She found losing weight easy, but maintenance not so much. She knew the reason she didn't have long-lasting success was that she didn't have her mind in the right space. Recently, thanks to Kelly Canueto's story, check out episodes 157 and 8, she realized that she had not actually been dealing with her past and her past trauma. She had acknowledged its existence, but hadn't worked through it, and it was still a heavy weight. With her eyes open, though, she had no choice and had to do the work. So now she is at the beginning of her journey again, and so much further along in such a short period of time. Because of how Kelly's episode affected her, Kelly really felt it was time to share her experiences as well. The Kelly is referring to is my friend from childhood, and from pre-teens we have grown up together. I've shared a post she wrote about how she overcame fibromyalgia a few times in my Facebook group, and then of course she told her story on the podcast. One of those posts struck a chord with the Kelly of today's interview, and it was really heartwarming to see her take it and run with it. She added some great resources of her own, which reminds me, I need to get those from her for the show notes. I will link back to the other Kelly's episodes, though, where you can find a good hub of resources. It's not easy facing and dealing with emotional trauma, and I can understand why it sometimes takes a long time to do so, even if it means living with chronic pain. I have the greatest admiration for people like the two Kellys and the hard work they put in to reclaim their health and happiness. So join me now to hear the first part of this Kelly's story. Two Kellys, very confusing. But then maybe there's something in a name. Kelly the brave and determined, maybe. So if you are struggling with chronic pain and or chronic fatigue, take some strength and inspiration and be more Kelly. Welcome, Kelly, to the Keto Woman podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Daisy. It's a pleasure finally speaking with you.
I know. It's been a long time coming, hasn't it? You're one of those people. We've been talking about this on and off for, I don't know how long. It's probably over a year, isn't it?
I think so, yes. Yes, it's been a while. I just kept not sending you the audio recording clip.
It's funny, isn't it? But I think often these things, they just wait for the right time. And it felt like the right time, which we will kind of get to why it was the right time in a minute. But it seemed like the right opportunity to get back in touch with you and see if you would be willing to record. So that's what we did. And you said yes. I'm very happy to say that you said yes. It's very nice to be with you here today.
Likewise. And I absolutely love your podcast. So this is an honor for me as well. I've seen every episode. I've watched many of them more than once. Well, I say watched. I actually played them on YouTube. So they are on actually my television, but it's really only the audio. But yeah, I love your podcast. I love your approach with all of your guests. So it's actually a very comfortable feeling to participate in your podcast with you. It feels like being part of the family.
Well, that's good to hear, because that's certainly the kind of atmosphere that I always aimed for. So that's really good to hear.
You're a pro.
Well, it's been quite a while now. I've been at it for 3 years, so I should be fairly good at it by now.
Remarkably good. Actually, we watch quite a few podcasts, and I comment frequently on the quality of yours being so high compared to a lot of the other ones who have been podcasting just as long, if not longer. But your audio quality is always very good. Your just the presence that you have and that your guests have is very nice. Like I said, it's like being part of the family. It's everybody that's on it, throughout the podcast, throughout listening to whoever it is, it always feels like you know them. It's really nice.
It's really interesting, actually, because I always I felt with pretty well every guest I've had on that you developed some kind of bond after that recording session.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it's not just that recording session. We usually have a chat before, chat afterwards, whatever it is. But I do almost always feel differently about the person after I've spent time recording with them. So I guess that sort of plays into, that's kind of a part to it. Mm-hmm. And it's always very nice to hear somebody else who appreciates audio quality, because as you know, and many people know, I probably spend a little bit too much time over that. So it is nice when somebody picks up on that because it is something I pore over a bit.
Well, your effort is paying off. It's very evident, actually.
Well, I had good teachers.
Fantastic.
They set me up well. So we're not here to talk about me and podcasting. We're here to talk about you. So why don't you tell us a bit about you?
Sure. Okay. So I live in the Austin, Texas area with my husband and 3 cats. We've been here since 2013, and we moved from New England in Maine most recently. And we've been here. Well, this is our second home actually in Texas, but we moved here for basically opportunity. This is a great place for work, a lot of opportunity here. I think I mentioned the cost of living is actually quite good. So it's a great place to come when you just need to maybe, get rid of some debt or just build up your retirement fund or, that kind of thing, but also just crazy amount of work. I've never been anywhere that had so many different companies and so many opportunities, even through all of what we're going through right now with COVID and the markets being quite challenging for companies. Austin is still booming. They're still hiring. They're still building homes. We're still growing. So it's a really amazing thing to be part of, watching your community grow. It's very energizing.
It seems to be a real startup, a real sort of hotbed for startups. I've spoken to people on the podcast and seen people talking about it's where a lot of, entrepreneurs and small startups and big startups end up growing their business.
Yeah, I think that's true. We have a lot of small startup companies. There's a huge community actually in the Austin area geared essentially to helping fund startup companies.
Right.
So it's a good place. Probably there's more than one, but I'm familiar with only one of them. And also the business environment is very competitive. And we've actually had a lot of companies move from Silicon Valley to the Austin area. Most recently, Tesla is opening a factory here to build their truck. So a lot of really good opportunity for people here. And the only thing that's missing is the infrastructure, right? The roads. Commuting can be quite a bit crazy, but they're working on that. And everything else is here to be, whatever career you want, whatever your passion is. Everything is here for you to be successful. It's a very nice place actually to be when you're trying to grow a career.
Just not so great for allergies, is what we were talking about before we started, it turns out.
Right. Yeah. We moved in 2013. It was October. And December starts what's known here as cedar fever. There's a local cedar tree, and I don't know the exact genus of the tree. It's not a true cedar, but starting in December and January, it basically, if you're driving around, you can see the trees exploding with pollen.
Wow.
They're so prolific. Everything will be covered in a yellow dust. And my first year here, I got hit with cedar fever. It was quite traumatic. Actually, I'd never experienced allergies before. I guess that's the worst of the allergies, local allergies. But since that, I seem to have developed some sensitivities and allergies to just about every plant growing in the area. So it's constant all year long. I'm lucky. My symptoms are very mild. A little bit of, itchy eyes and sometimes, that sinus pressure a little bit, some postnasal drip, but very mild compared to most of the people I work with and interact with on a daily basis. So I'm lucky.
Yeah, we were saying it's not necessarily something you'd consider especially if it hasn't impacted you before, or even I guess if you were somebody who was impacted by these things, but only normally seasonally. I imagine it wouldn't necessarily be high on your list of things you thought about, but I bet it will be now.
Yes, it will be. And, it's just something I never considered, but Austin has something is growing all year round, and very different plants from what I was used to in New England, in Connecticut and in Maine. So there's that. You're being exposed to things you've never been exposed to, but it's relentless. There's something in flower or, growing literally all year round. So we don't really get any hard freezes.
Yeah.
We'll get a couple of below freezing days, but nothing to stop plants from growing. It's quite a challenge. It's definitely not something I considered when we moved here, but it will be something that yes, you're right. The impact of it will make sure that I do think about it with future moves.
It must be a whole different list of things that you haven't thought about, because I know we rely here on, and it's something that I notice, if the winter actually isn't a particularly cold winter, that the following year it has a roll-on effect of the levels of different bugs that are around, or, fleas on the animals, for example, will be very bad if you haven't had a winter that's cold enough to kill things off. And it's all these other things that you don't necessarily think about. I remember talking to Terry about fleas, and how, I was talking about the frequency with which I treat my animals for fleas, and I'm always one of these people who likes to go for the minimum with any kind of something like that basically is a toxic chemical that you're putting on your animal. So I don't like to do it more than necessary, and I certainly don't subscribe to the doing it every month like the vets would have you do. But she was saying a very good point, that she has to do it with much more frequency and much more regularity than I do. I can usually get away with basically just doing them maybe 2, maybe 3 times a year. But of course, I have a big wodge of the year that's effectively downtime, where she doesn't have any of that downtime. So I imagine that's the same for you, something that you maybe didn't consider with your cats, that you've had to change their treatment.
So we don't actually treat the cats. We treat the yard instead. So that actually wasn't even a service that was available up north.
Right.
But here they have a lot of services geared towards pests that I'd never heard of before. So our cats, like I said, we've been here since 2013, and they've never had fleas, and we don't treat them. The company that we do use to treat the yard, they've not reacted to the chemicals that they use on the lawn, and we monitor them really closely because obviously there are babies. So they've done well with that. But yes, you're right. So mosquitoes are crazy here. We don't get that freeze, and it's wet. So there's a lot of standing water. Mosquitoes are just awful, but we can get treatment for that as well. The things that I worried about when we moved here absolutely ended up being non-events, right? So, spiders and snakes, we have black widows and we have poisonous snakes, and I've seen one black widow, and I actually, without thinking, because this is what I do with all spiders, I captured it and released it outside. Wasn't even thinking that it was deadly. But I've only seen one. I haven't seen any scorpions. I haven't seen any poisonous snakes, just grass snakes and, rat snakes and corn snakes. And so I was terrified of those things when we decided to move here, and it's a non-issue. But then the things I didn't think about have ended up being a big problem. So ants, fire ants, all kinds of ants, termites. Yeah, the bugs, because there is no die-off. We don't get enough of a freeze. They can always burrow, for a day or two if we do get a frost. And so the number of bugs here it's quite crazy. Even sitting outside, like I love digging in the dirt, gardening. You have to be very, very careful because you don't know what kind of bugs are going to be in your soil. So more poisonous species.
Yeah, that would drive me mad.
Yeah.
And then, the mosquitoes would drive me mad. I mean, we have sort of mosquito times of the year here. I know that from visiting my father in Thailand. All year is mosquito time of the year, yeah. And they love me. So, yeah, I would not be happy with that at all.
Yeah. So, we have a lot of screened in areas, which might not be, as popular. It's not something that we saw a lot of up north. But most homes here have a screened in porch or something similar to allow outdoor time away from the bugs. So it's quite common. We have a nice porch area on our home that's screened in. So, we have it set up so we can have a barbecue area and some seating, and it's quite comfortable.
Sounds good. Well, we've heard all about the area you live in.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So let's get back to you and I guess, well, there are a couple of things we're talking about, but let's sort of start with the keto side of things. There is another side to it that we're going to get to, but let's start with the keto side of things, you know, where you were at before and what led you down that path.
Sure. So this might be a little bit of a long story. It started in kindergarten. I was very obese. I remember, this is quite embarrassing, and I don't know if they do this anymore in schools, but the first week of kindergarten, getting lined up to visit the school nurse, and they measure you and weigh you. And I remember being 99 pounds, and the nurse making a big fuss about it. You know, of course, I was obese. I was one of the taller kids in the class, but I was still very much obese. And that instilled in me this feeling of not being, you know, good enough or not being where I needed to be. And they really did make a big deal out of it. They brought the principal in to talk to us, and it was quite crazy. So from that moment on, I had this idea that I had to lose weight. Now, I was 5 years old.
Wow. And what sort of approach did they take then? I mean, obviously they came in and created probably a very unhealthy dose of shame and guilt, but presumably their suggestions were along the very typical lines of just eating too much.
Be more active. How much more active can you get than a 6-year-old or 5-year-old, right? Like, be more active, you know, smaller portion sizes.
All the typical.
The typical. You know, but the message was clear. There were 2 girls and 1 boy who were singled out as being obese and kind of used as examples for the rest of the class. And I was one of the girls. And it was traumatic. It's something that obviously I still remember the feeling of.
I bet.
So it was quite intense.
What was the reason for that? I mean, we can often look back at it with benefit of hindsight. Sometimes it absolutely does just simply come down to what you're eating, or more accurately, what you're being fed. But often it comes down to something else, like a genetic disposition or some kind of disorder. Or what was it with you? Do you know?
Oh, geez. Yeah. I had 2 older brothers who were ravenous people. And my mother literally just served me the same portions as she did my brothers. And I was expected to eat them or I wasn't leaving the table. Though my brothers did help me a little bit because they were so ravenous, they would pick off my plate. So that helped a lot. But, you know, that was my mother being more worried about. So we were quite poor growing up. And my mother was more worried about me not getting enough nutrition than having too much. And it was a real concern. And I say this a lot, and people have a hard time believing it, but my father was a fisherman, and we were so poor that I would go to school with crab and lobster sandwiches. And now, of course, those are delicacies, but back then they were free. It didn't last. Being poor didn't last. There were a couple of really, really good fishing years where my father did really well. And then there was not any more worry of money or food. But by then, the habits were already instilled, you know, pile your plate up and finish it off, or you don't get to go outside.
Sure.
So, yeah. And I think this was an era, kindergarten for me, and I don't mind people knowing my age, I'm 47. So kindergarten for me was in 1978 and 79. And in Canada, where I grew up, this was the time of the Canadian fitness programs and, you know, having evaluations in school where you did sit-ups and push-ups and all this thing. And there was a real focus on fitness and health. So that I think that is probably what the reasoning was behind having everybody, you know, walked by the nurse and getting measured and weighed. But, you know, so it went hand in hand. It wasn't just the dieting issue. They also, you know, it was also activity. But the effect on me of that experience was quite negative, you know, like something's wrong with me. And really, you're spot on when you say that there are other factors. So genetically, most of my family is obese. Fortunately, most of them are tall. I got the short genes. But then also most of them have other issues that I don't have. So maybe those were linked to the tall genes, so I got lucky in some ways as well. So there are so many factors that the school nurse, whatever program she was following at the time, because I'm sure it was some type of, Canada-wide program, didn't take any of that into consideration. It was purely looking at diet and activity level. So, yeah, it was quite negative.
And so, yeah, that's it's a very negative way to start at a very early age, and something, a burden that's put on your shoulders for you to, potentially carry through all of your school years. I mean, I'd be interested
And I did.
to hear, what happened? What was the progression? When people often remember when they first went on their first diet and started actually thinking about trying to lose weight. It sounds like certainly other people were trying to get you from a very, very early age to do that.
Yeah. And, I think when you're that young, and I think adults may not think about it, what the impact of their actions have on really young children. But as a 5-year-old, I didn't have the ability to process what they were asking me to do. They understand, like right now you'd say, oh, well, you can go, as an adult, you go and you can look up the science, or you can, you can try things and experiment things. But at 5, I didn't have control over what I was being fed, or, how much I was eating or not eating. So the education, the information they shared with me, I wasn't able to act on it. It was outside of my control. It was one more thing that I'm being shamed for something that I can't do anything about. But it was always in the back of my mind, and I was always trying to lose weight. And it had the opposite effect. By the second or third grade, I had gained another 30 pounds. And, everybody thought they were doing everything to help me lose weight, including my family and our physicians, our doctors, family doctors. I grew up in a really, really small community, right? So 2,000 people. We had our own hospital, which was kind of amazing. So we had doctors. But after they thought they had exhausted all opportunities with me, and I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but in the 3rd grade, I was put on diet pills.
Wow. So what kind of age is that? I'm not familiar with. I always forget what age different grades are.
I would have been 8 or 9.
Wow.
Years old, yeah. And sneaking out to the water fountain so you can take a pill that you're not supposed to be on, because they're not supposed to be prescribed to people as young as you are. And at that point, you're old enough to know that that's the case and you need to hide this. They didn't work. So they didn't work.
I mean, the worst possible thing you can do with kids, I think, is single them out as being something different.
Yeah.
So to do that from the get-go, yeah, not a good move.
Not good. No. And, it's really funny. I don't hide any of this from people if they ask, but most people don't ask. But here I am, I'm 47, and I would have been 8 or 9 years old then. So 30 years ago, approximately 29, 30 years ago, I'm sitting here and I'm talking to you about this experience, and I'm reliving it. I can see what I was wearing. I can see this layout. We had pods back then. So they were small open areas. I can picture everything as if I was still there. So it was very emotional. Something that has stuck with me for that long, and there were repercussions to taking these diet pills too. They are literally legal speed. They basically ramp up your adrenaline response, and you feel like all jittery and shortly after that, they tried to diagnose me with ADHD, but it turned out it was the diet pills. But the stigma of not being able to talk about the fact that I was on diet pills to the school nurse, so yeah, a lot of challenges. Ended up, not taking the diet pills anymore, and the ADHD kind of miraculously went away. But the long-term effect on my metabolism, something that wasn't so easy to get rid of. So that took years for my metabolism to reset itself from being, falsely jacked up by these pills. But I did join Weight Watchers after that in like the third grade. I wasn't very good at following it, if you can imagine, when I was, like I said, 9 years old. 9 years old, you don't have any control.
No.
At 9 years old about what you're eating or the choices that are made for you.
I mean, that's incredible. You've not only got this burden that's been put on you, but you've just got no control of the situation. So, as you said before, you're being blamed for something that you have no control over. So, what are you supposed to do about it?
I cried a lot, to be honest. It's really kind of funny. Like, I was obese. When I can share pictures and you'll see that I was quite big. The kids actually didn't make fun of me for being big, which was funny, because kids can be cruel.
I was going to say, I would have expected that. So that
not
was
yet.
Something.
Yeah, not yet. Not at that age. There were a few people, but mostly it was not that bad. And it might have been because I was quite tall and strong. And, I wasn't shy about defending myself verbally. And if it needed to be, also physically. And that, is another benefit of having two very large, bigger brothers, constantly roughhousing with them and playing with them. But, I don't actually remember at that age any of the kids being made fun of on the regular, but that did come later. So I guess I was lucky growing up in a small, close-knit community where people knew everybody. I don't think that somebody going through what I was going through in a larger city, say, where, maybe there were only 20 people in my class, right? And I knew everyone. And if they made fun of me, I knew who their parents were, and I knew who their sisters and brothers were, and their great-great-grandparent. I knew the whole family lineage, and it wasn't anonymous. There's no way they could get away with it. But in a bigger school where you don't know everybody, it's kind of like social media. The kids can make fun of other kids, and there's no repercussions to them because you don't really know who they are or how to deal with it. It's a very different world.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, it must come down to the kids as well, because I mean, actually, the girl who gave me the most grief through a lot of my school years was the person I spent probably most time with, who was, very well known to my family, and our mums were friends and all the rest of it. So,
wow.
Yeah, I think it also speaks highly of the kids you were at school with, to be honest. I think that that plays a part. So we'll give them credit too, I think.
Yeah, of course. Actually, I'm still friends with quite a few of them. Again, though, it's a really small community, and I'm sorry about your friend giving you a hard time. But I did luck out in that regard. I didn't have a lot of close friends then, I lived in a neighborhood where I was the only girl, and the boys didn't really fancy having a girl playing softball or football with them. So I didn't have a lot of close friends outside of school. So I guess I was lucky that, I did have half a dozen really good friends at school. And even back then, I think, so I will step back, and I'm not sure, like, I really don't remember the kids being cruel or making fun of people, but I'm not sure that I would have let it bother me even if they had. I just tend to not, and even as a child, to not let things get to me. That's one of the ways that women, I mean, you kind of bottle it up and keep it in. Not just women, but I think primarily women are brought up to do those things, to be pleasant and to smile and
that's right.
To not challenge things too much.
We're more likely, I think, to internalize things and end up taking it out on ourselves, basically, and our own bodies usually pay the price.
I think that's true. Yeah, and I think it's true for me, but I also think back of the people that I grew up with, and I see it now. I see the effects of our childhood on, the people that I'm still friends with from back then. And having done a lot of the research and work that I've done to help myself, it's actually frustrating because I can see what's happening, but, you can't convince other people, they have to come to it on their own.
Oh, absolutely. So how did things change where you started to gain a little bit more control over, what you ate and what you did?
So it was March break in the third grade still. So I was just shy of 9 years old. And I got my first good sized bicycle, actually. And this was a time where there wasn't any crime, actually, in the community I grew up with. And my parents allowed me a lot of freedom to go out on my bicycle. And I would ride and ride and ride and ride and ride.
Me too.
And, I will say exercise is not a way to lose weight, but I fell in love with riding my bicycle. And I would probably spend 3, 4, 5 hours a day, like on weekends and as much as possible. But like I said, this was our March break, our spring break. So I had an entire 10 days off. And over the course of that spring break, while I was riding my bicycle more, I noticed that it affected my appetite quite a bit. But the things that I wanted to eat were different. And I just started paying attention. And I know this sounds weird for a 9-year-old, but I started asking my mother to let me serve my own plate. And she did. My brothers weren't too fond about that because she realized, well, why aren't they doing it too? But she let me start serving my own plate. So I tended to focus more on, at that time I had no concept of macros, but I focused on, I didn't eat as much bread because I felt that was filling and it wasn't giving me anything of value except for that it tasted good and I could put a lot of butter on it even back then. But I started focusing more on we already knew about the Canada food guide back then, so I was trying to follow that a little bit more. And at the end of the March break, I had lost 5 or 6 pounds in about 10 days.
Wow.
We all know a lot of that was water weight, but I kept the activity up and I kept monitoring my portions. And over the next 2 or 3 years, I remember so when I was about 12, I hadn't gained any more weight. I was the same weight, but I had grown almost a foot.
Big change.
And that stuck with me, really impacted me quite a bit. And I increased my activity as I was getting older and able to do more. I joined the hockey team. I did softball. I did volleyball, racquetball, all the balls, tennis. I just did as much as I could to keep active. And I continued to monitor my portions. And like I said, back then it was the Canada Food Guide. So, I think if I remember correctly, it was like a fistful size of protein, and I think it was 5 to 7 servings of fruits and vegetables. I actually happened to be quite lucky in that I loved vegetables, so it was predominantly vegetables, and fruits weren't that available because I lived in a northern climate, and we did get food trucked in, but it's not like today where you can get food from all over the world and it still be fresh enough to eat. So I was really lucky in that regard. So 5th, 6th grade, I was still about 120 pounds. But like I said, I had grown about a foot. So I was quite slender, actually. And I maintained that throughout high school. Not that exact weight, because I grew a little bit more. And I think, it was working for me. The combination of activity and my diet was working quite well.
I'm fascinated by how that came about. Yeah, okay, with a certain amount of external influence, but it sounds like it was very much based on instinct. It was really coming from you. Like you were saying, you were, I guess, and you say that exercise isn't a way to lose weight, and that's, depending who you speak to, is debatable whether it can be or not. But I certainly think it definitely can be very much part of the picture, and especially that kind of exercise that gets you outside and in the fresh air, and also just spending time doing something that isn't potentially sitting down and eating. It's something that I always notice when I'm, when I'm out spending the day gardening or something. I don't think about the snacking and the picking at things in the fridge that I tend to do when I'm in the location of the fridge. So there's something to be said to it from that point of view, but it just sounds like it was just part and parcel of you kind of tuning in a bit more to your body and listening to actually the kind of food that your body was asking for. I find, I'm not overly surprised because I know you quite well and you have a very good, just a sense for these things, but it very interesting, especially, someone of that age to be having a very mature response to what they're eating and what they're doing lifestyle wise.
So interestingly enough, I think a lot of it was that bicycle, right? That first bicycle and the freedom. It really was freedom that I was gifted with that bicycle. So I could choose if I wanted to ride every day, how much I wanted to ride, how much time I spent at home versus outside. And it was just that little taste of freedom, which gave me the courage to ask for more freedom. So, I'm not sure you're giving me more benefit than I would give myself there on the instinct part. And maybe there was some truth to that. Because certainly I had tried other programs and following them already. I had been on Weight Watchers and multiple times. And actually my aunt, my dad's oldest sister, was one of the founding members of the local Weight Watchers group. And she had lost over 100 pounds in her 30s. And actually, she's in her 60s now and hasn't gained an ounce of that weight back. So she's done a good job of it. But I just wonder, for me, I feel like it was taking control is what gave me the courage, get that little bit of freedom. I liked it and I wanted more. And then that gave me the opportunity to pick and choose things. I still couldn't pick what my mother would cook or what was available in the house, but I could pick the portions of what I would eat, of what was available. And then eventually, I got brave enough to ask for different things. And just that little taste of freedom actually is probably what changed my world at that point. But as you know, I said I maintained that weight through high school. So, there's more to it than just that, right? But I do believe, I've read a lot about if you let children choose their own food, they tend to make better choices than what we would anticipate from them. And that might be a little bit instinctual. Your body responds in different ways.
Especially if you can start from an early age. And I mean, it's really, for most kids anyway, as soon as you start giving them the option of things like chocolate and ice cream and all those kind of goodies, they're going to go for that, because who wouldn't really? But yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's just something that struck me, that the difference between when something came from you and came from inside you, it was working better than something that had been an external force, whether it be the school, whether it be some kind of program like Weight Watchers you signed up for. And you say that I'm giving you more credit than is due. I don't think you're taking as much credit as you should. So we need to meet somewhere in the middle, maybe.
Yeah. And I think there's a little bit of rebellion in there as well.
Oh, for sure.
To be totally honest with you. I don't know how to explain it, but there's, even at that young age, you have this sense, I had this sense that I didn't want to be controlled. And so that whole idea of people telling me to do things or telling me what to do, I did my best to follow it, but there was that, like, who are you to tell me what to do? Even at that young age. And it's funny, I think, we've talked a lot about the, the 4 tendencies, I think it's what it's called. I definitely have some rebellion in me a little bit.
Yeah.
So. But yeah, like, just being able to, I think getting that little bit of freedom was like, it was a switch for me. It literally was like an on-off. It went from being told what I could do and what I couldn't do, what I could eat and what I couldn't eat, to being able to make my choices for myself. Even if they were not related to food initially, just being given that opportunity to make decisions was so empowering. And I think, really lucky that I grew up in the time that I did grow up in, where it was okay for my parents to allow me that freedom, and that they weren't worried, about me. I don't know, of an equivalent in this time, in this age, that would provide that for a child that young. Yeah, you would definitely not want your children out on a bicycle all by themselves, And also there was one main road, so I couldn't get lost. It's one of those things where it was just a perfect environment to allow that type of freedom. And it was not unusual. I wasn't the only kid, 9-10 years old on a bicycle all by themselves. It was actually quite common.
Oh, I used to love my bike. Yeah. And earlier than that, I must have been thinking about where I was living. I must have been sort of that age and a bit younger. I used to have a chopper, the bike was called. It was one of those ones that had that big sort of metal bit on the back. And I used to love that bike. And there were a couple of local boys in my street who used to have a little bike gang. And we just used to get together and go all over the place on the bike. So I was lucky enough to live near a park or two, and quite a quiet sort of, there was a housing estate in between me, I think, and one of the parks that was, quiet when it came to roads and things. So we had a really good environment to tear around on bikes. So yes, I remember that kind of feeling of freedom and enjoying just being out on my bike and, outside and doing what I wanted to. So
it's really interesting how, empowering I think that was for me, and I think probably for other children as well. I live in a beautiful neighborhood right now, about 3,000 homes, more homes here than in the community I grew up in. But the parents, we make sure that the kids are safe. There's sidewalks. They'll block off streets for the kids to go out and play, and I love listening to them outside. I just think about how free we were because of the age that we lived in, that we grew up in, and how different it is today. But I live in a community where the parents are doing their best for their kids to allow them that freedom. And I just love it. It makes me so happy to listen to them. And now I don't have children of my own. I didn't mention, I said the cats were my babies, but yeah, I still love kids. I think it's amazing the energy they bring. And I will oftentimes, actually even now, go out and play with them.
Mm.
So, yeah, it's still freedom.
So where did it go from there? Things were going quite well then at high school. You literally kind of grew into yourself.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I applied to university, so college for American audience. I had grew up in a neighborhood where there were really no restaurant. There was one or two restaurants, and there were a couple of convenience stores, but 90% of our food was cooked at home, maybe more. So I went away to university and I enrolled in a pre-med degree at St. Francis Xavier University in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. I actually was there on a full scholarship. And so I had actually extra money. And the restaurants were all over the place. And my studies were actually quite intense, so I didn't have the amount of time that I did in high school for extracurricular activities and exercise. So I literally started eating pizza 3 or 4 times a week, and all kinds of, different food that I've never been exposed to before. Fast food. I'd never had fast food, and I was sedentary. So the pounds quickly piled on, and I would gain weight during school, and I would go home for summer and lose it and gain it. And, eventually I wasn't able to lose it all. And I ended up graduating in 1995 at 213 pounds. So I literally gained almost 100 pounds in school. Mm. And I lost that again, mostly through the summer, which is crazy. Decided to go back to school. And at that point, it was pretty obvious to me that my eating habits were the cause of the weight gain. Because when I went back to eating home-cooked food, the weight just naturally started falling off. And when I was in an environment where it was just easier to eat out, I would gain the weight back. So that starts my comment on knowing and doing are two different things, because even though I knew that was the cause of my weight gain, I still chose, the easy route. So ordering in all the time instead of cooking. I maintained the 213 pounds, not proud of that, but I maintained that actually until I met my husband. That was in 1998, and we were both working at Pfizer in Connecticut. He was actually also overweight at the time. I don't remember. It was kind of funny because I'm 5'5", and at 213 pounds, you would think I was this big roly-poly kind of person. But because I had been so active and into sports, I was very muscular. Mm. And I was actually not as big as what most people would think. Nobody would guess that I weighed what I weighed. And my clothing sizes definitely indicated that as well. But part of being courted by my husband was a lot of eating out. And we lived in Connecticut at that time where there were so many more opportunities. We probably ate every meal out. And I quickly gained weight. I think, and it's funny, you're happy. I don't know if you're friends with my husband on Facebook, but we've been together 22 years and we're still very much in love with each other. And you get this camaraderie and comfort with somebody that you care about and you have a good relationship with, where you're not worried so much about how you look. And, at that age, I still felt really good. I was healthy. I didn't have any, all the biomarkers were excellent to my doctor's chagrin. Couldn't understand that. But you don't think about the weight as much. You're in a happy relationship, and we didn't really focus so much on the physical looks. It was more of that emotional connection and all the things that we shared that we both enjoyed. So by the time I got married, I was up to 258 pounds. I remember these numbers like crazy, like they stick with you and you're doing something crazy. But yeah, we just kept going. We got married. We did a little weenie roast, a small lake in Groton, Connecticut. It was in the community his parents lived in. And I made my wedding cake and, very low key. But I remember going shopping for my wedding dress and trying to figure out where to shop, because I was kind of in between sizes now. Up until that point, I had been shopping in normal size, not the plus sizes. I had still been able to get away with, shopping in any store I wanted to, but I was right on that boundary, and I had to. So I weighed myself, and we decided to go to a store that had both, plus size and non-plus size clothing. And I ended up having to buy a plus size dress. And then I remember how much that bothered me.
Yes, I can remember the stigma of where you could shop. And for many, many years, someone I recorded with a Brit last week, and she said the same thing about there was just sort of one shop then when we were that age called Evans, and that was the only shop, and it was plus size clothes, and it was really fuddy-duddy plus size clothes as well. I mean, they had a real shake up, and they had, I don't know if you're familiar with Dawn French, a British comedian, but she was involved in the restyling of some of her clothes. She's got a well-known plus size woman at that time, and people like her just drove the fashion in these plus size shops and says, we don't want these horrible fuddy-duddy clothes. We want to wear nice clothes too. And actually there was a real shake up, and more plus sizes came into the quote unquote, regular normal stores, and there became so much more available. But yeah, there was this period of time where there was just this one shop you could go to, and it had horrible clothes.
Yes.
But that was the only place you could shop if you wanted clothing because nothing else would fit. So, you were stuck with it, and it was a horrible stigma to carry around.
It was, and that was, it was actually Dress Barn. They went bankrupt this year through the COVID challenge, but it's exactly as you'd say. They had one side of their store which was the normal, air quotes, normal sizes, and the clothing was beautiful, and it was actually of better quality. And then they had a divider, and on the other side of the store they had the plus size clothing, and it was kind of what you would expect your great grandmother would have worn.
That's right. And like you say, the fabric was different. It's all like the polyester stuff and the nasty fabrics, and the designs were horrible. And it's like, what is your problem? Why can't we have nice clothes?
Yeah. And it was traumatizing, actually. So that led to my next attempt to lose weight. No surprise, right? I ended up just buying a straight shift dress, nothing fancy, with a wrap. And it was I think I paid $70 for it. So this was in 1999. It was the least offensive thing I could buy in the store. And this was my wedding day, so I wasn't, it was a really informal picnic, so I didn't want like a wedding gown. But the impact was there, and we decided we were going to do something about it. So a little background about my wedding. Mike and I got married in the park by a Wiccan priestess. We had a hand fasting,
Cool.
which you may be familiar with, but it's just a promise to be faithful. We wrote our own vows. We orchestrated our ceremony. And this lady, who was our Wiccan priestess, she was actually a justice of the peace as well, but so it was a legally binding marriage. But she had just had weight loss surgery. And I was seriously thinking about it initially. Her initial, operation prep was a very, very low carb diet.
Oh, interesting.
And high protein. And she lost weight on that diet in preparation for the surgery. And then she had the surgery, and she referred me to her doctors and everything. And I'm terrified of surgery. I've never actually had surgery. And I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And she had actually phenomenal results, changed her entire life. She's one of the few people I know who didn't have any complications, aside from the reduced vitamin and mineral uptake where you have to take special formulations. She didn't have any of the heartburn or, any gastrointestinal issues from it. She was super lucky. I kept thinking about it, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't pull that switch. I was more terrified of having surgery than I was of being morbidly obese. And right around that time, I was up at night, and I've always been a bad sleeper. So I would get up in the middle of the night and not be able to fall asleep and turn on the television. And there was an ad for the 6-week body makeover. That might be one that most people haven't heard of. It was quite niche. And I think unless you had been up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, you probably never heard of it. But I signed up for it, and I ordered it, and I got the kit. And this was basically, there was a questionnaire that you had to fill out based on your body type, right? So there was 30 or 40 questions, and it identified you as one of 4 body types. And your diet was tailored to your body type. And I can't remember right now. This was in 2001. There was an online support group, if you can imagine, way back then. And one of the ironic things I remember about that support group is that 90% of the people were from Idaho, and they were all former pageant queens. It was so interesting, so fascinating to be part of that group. I learned a lot about weight loss from them and what not to do. But also, it was a really good supportive community online. And it's not like today where, we can have a video chat or whatnot. It was literally just like a chat room where you kind of like Messenger. But great support group. And I did lose weight. I lost 30 or 40 pounds using this program. And really the challenge for me was that Mike and I had different body types. And so we were eating completely different food. And eventually I got sick and tired of cooking that much food. And Mike did cook some for himself, but he wasn't all that comfortable in the kitchen. So I ended up cooking 2 different meals for us every day. And eventually I started morphing the 2 different body types food together, like to try and pick what would be like the happy medium. And that totally didn't work. And the weight came back on and extra.
Of course, yeah.
Of course, right? So 2002, when my husband got laid off from his job, I remember, having desperately been trying to lose weight all along. I was 272 pounds. So that was quite a bit of a shock. But I was like, well, what else can I try? So we went back on Weight Watchers. We did all the regular things, tried, shakes and all kinds of things, and nothing worked. And every time I just kept getting bigger and bigger.
I was expecting you. That was the way I was expecting that story to go, was that you latched on to the low carb, high-ish protein diet that your friend was on before the weight loss surgery.
Not yet, but it's coming. It's coming. Yeah, not yet. I wasn't, it's kind of funny. This was about 2000. when she had her surgery. So her high protein, low carb diet was essentially medical shakes.
That is the problem quite often.
And you couldn't get them without a prescription.
Right.
And I hadn't clicked in yet, and it's embarrassingly that you could simulate the same type of diet. Mm-hmm. It just hadn't been there. But we then, so like when I said earlier, my husband got laid off. This was in 2002 in Connecticut. There was so much competition for the few jobs available in the area that we decided to make a complete switch. And we moved to Caribou, Maine, which is one of the most northern areas in continental U.S. And when we moved to Maine, so this, people always laugh and they say it's not possible, but we're both very introverted. And it took us a while to meet people. But one of the first people we met was doing the Atkins diet.
Ah.
And, you know, I remember he was an avid Atkins diet follower, and he's a super intelligent person, but he never focused, like when he was explaining the diet, he never focused on the science behind it. And all I ever saw was this guy eating lots of fat and protein and so much salt. How could that possibly be healthy for you? And we used to joke that he was pickling himself alive. If only I had paid attention, right? But he was losing weight and he was looking really good. So I think 2004, 2005, I bought the Atkins book. And I had pretty good success with it. I don't actually remember exactly how much weight I lost, but I will tell you it was because we needed to do, we were getting life insurance and we needed to have a physical done. And I was like, oh, there's no way I want to see the number that I'm at right now. I knew it was over 300 pounds. I just never got on the scale. First of all, I didn't have a scale that would go up that high. So I don't actually know what I weighed, but I know it had to be over 300 pounds because of the previous weight that I had weighed myself. My scale went up to 300 pounds and it basically pegged. And I was a lot bigger than the last time I had weighed myself, which was in the 280s. So when I did actually end up getting my physical, which was about 8 months, 10 months after we had started the Atkins diet, I was 248 pounds.
Wow.
So I'd had really good success with the diet. And, you know, and you would think at that point, you figured it out and you're going to keep going. But as part of the physical of my husband, he had been diagnosed with diabetes when he was 22. And it had mostly been under control. But I don't know what happened. His blood sugars were quite high. And that's when we actually went to the dietitian. And she changed his diet completely to match the Dietetic Association diet, which was 21 grams of carb, or I can't remember. It was like 6 small carbish meals with minimal protein and low fat.
Crazy.
And, you know, eventually I stopped wanting to cook the 2 different kinds of meal and went to eating what he was eating. And started gaining weight again, but I didn't pay attention to it. You know, I think one of the tools, people say don't weigh yourself too often, it's depressing. But if you don't weigh yourself often enough to catch the small changes, they become big changes. And one of the things with plus size clothes, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's experienced this, but I'm going to say what my experience is. You're in one size for 40 pounds.
They're stretchy.
You know, they're stretchy and
they're designed to fit. Yeah.
Yeah. So
no, I kind of agree with you about the scales. I know I'm more used to periods of maintenance now, so I can sort of quite easily tell by how I'm feeling. What with the difference in clothes when you wear clothes that are a fit rather than elasticated, you know, so like jeans or something, you can tell very quickly if they're just feeling a bit tighter. You know, you need to loosen the belt a little bit or something. But I agree with you about the scales. I think a lot of people have a complicated relationship with the scales, and certainly if you're somebody who obsesses with it. But I know it's been periods where I know that I've been gaining weight and I'm kind of not really in denial about it. I know it's happening, but I'm in denial about it in the fact that I won't get on the scales. And it's only when I decide enough is enough, got to do something about this, that's when I get back on the scales and start sort of, you know, looking at what's going on. So it's a difficult one. Like you say, it's all very well saying don't get on the scales, but it is it is a marker just to have an idea of what's going on.
It is.
Yeah, for sure. Don't be necessarily on them every day or whatever, but just to kind of know. I think a lot of people, yeah, like you said, with different periods of time, you didn't actually know how much you weighed, but you knew it was more than before, but it's all wrapped up with this sort of denial element, isn't it?
There was definitely a lot of denial. And yeah, so there was the part of not getting weighed, but also I enjoyed Mike's diabetic diet. It tasted really good and it was super flexible. The guidelines were really easy to follow. And I was easily able to trick myself into thinking I was doing the right thing and that it was healthy. So there was a lot of denial. And there was a lot of, well, this is what we need to do for Mike anyway. So it's kind of funny. And actually, I told you earlier about going. So eventually I went to the dietitian's office with my husband. And we had a discussion about all of the things that she had recommended versus some of the stuff that I had learned separately, the Atkins diet and, my friend who had had the weight loss surgery. And I was starting to piece those things together. Now, the internet was widely available and you could do a lot of research, and PubMed is still one of my favorite resources. But I also had a lot of access to scientific information that most people didn't have access through my contacts at Pfizer. And, I was challenging her, but I was afraid to do something that would hurt Mike at the same time. So basically what ended up happening is that even though we were following her advice for his diet perfectly well, Mike wasn't actually improving. His diabetes was getting worse. His sugars were going up, not drastically, slowly, but over the course of a few years, he had to increase his medication. He had to, first of all, go on medication and then increase his medication and then add additional medications. And we both kind of got fed up at that point and said, well, this isn't working. You're worse off than you were, before we started following the dietary advice. And I'm not going to say that it doesn't work for anybody, because I'm assuming it does. That's why it's the dietary advice. But it wasn't working for us. And, we're all unique and we all need to make our own decisions.
I mean, it is the dietary advice, but it also goes hand in hand with people being told that it's a progressive disorder. So,
yes,
that you put those two together, and maybe it's not something that is ever really going to work very well.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Yeah, and I think some people are willing to accept that it's a progressive disease and other people are not. And we eventually ended up in the we are not willing to accept that it's progressive.
Well, I was listening to a podcast this morning and he was talking about the fact that he's someone who's trying to push for low carb and lifestyle options being offered as a potential alternative. Not saying, right, this is the way that everyone should be treated, but he was making the point that if people don't know something is an option, they don't necessarily know it's an option. Unless they're the kind of person who stumbles across the information or has a friend who offers them the information or has done something similar and they've seen that happen, or they see something on TV, or they're naturally curious and stubborn and like to research. Basically, unless they find it out for themselves, how are they going to know? You don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And if you're not offered it as an alternative, so if you're told, okay, you have this condition, it's a progressive disorder, this is how we manage it, and this is the best we can do for you. If nobody tells you, oh, but hey, there is this other alternative that potentially could have this slightly different, very potentially different outcome, and it's going to involve you doing something else. Yes, it's probably going to involve a lot more work and a lot more changes on your behalf, and we're not saying you have to do it, but this is an option. It's something that you could potentially choose to do. But if nobody tells you about that, how do you know?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would still choose, the medication route.
Oh, I know people. Yeah, there's a guy up the road from me who has been type 2 diabetic for a long, long time. And yeah, about 5 years ago, he was telling me how he had just started injecting insulin. And I said to him, well, there are problems that are going to come with that. And I do know a way that, especially as you've only just started, I could get you off that again. And I told him, well, no, I'd rather keep eating the bread and have an injection once a day. And, what can you do if people have the right to make that choice as well?
Absolutely.
But at least when somebody knows there's another option, that's my point, is just giving people the option.
Yeah, I think that is very important. And it's interesting. You said, your neighbor sharing with you that they had to go on insulin. For us, the trigger was Mike's blood pressure. They don't tell you. A lot of doctors may not even know that it's not only impacting your blood sugar, but it will impact your blood pressure if you stay on these medications. And eventually, both will be dysregulated to the point where you're on long-term medication. So when Mike had to add the blood pressure medication is kind of when we started looking for other alternatives. And to be honest, I'm lazy. We're both programmers, software engineers. He likes to joke that being lazy is a virtue for software developers, and it's quite true because you figure out how to do things efficiently and effectively. But right around that time, my mother had heard of a program on Oprah Winfrey. And she had me research it. And it was the John Gray, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. He had a line of shakes and supplements based on his books. And she wanted me to research them for her. So I did that. And there wasn't anything dangerous in them. Like, they were good, solid nutrition. But they weren't being sold as a weight loss program. They were being sold as how to optimize your how you feel, your emotions, your mental and emotional well-being. And she started losing weight taking these. And she was doing it because she had depression. I can remember my mother not wanting to go out of the house for months at a time and having, spending most of her time in bed and just not wanting to participate with the rest of the world. And this program, this supplement actually did help her with her depression. She would get up at a normal time of day and actually interact with us. But as a side effect, she was losing weight. And I just kept on telling her, no, Mom, I'm not interested. No, Mom, I'm not interested. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but somebody close to her had a weight-related, I think it was a heart attack, but I can't remember. But somebody close to her got really sick, and it was a very scary event. They survived. But I remember Mom calling me, and it was January 2011. At that time. So you can see the roller coaster up and down, various programs all the way through. But she called me and she was crying and she begged me to do this for her. So I did. I signed up and I bought the shakes. At that time, John Gray's program had been bought by another company. And I won't say the name, but it was a very, very famous company, weight loss shake company. And now they do, they have programs for athletes, and they even have a low carb option. Even back then, they had a low carb option. So January 24th, I started this program. And in 7 months, I lost 100 pounds.
Wow.
But I quickly found myself depressed. The emotional and mental support and well-being was just not there. I found myself kind of just not caring. I didn't want to get up and I didn't want to go out. So I added this John Gray program to what I had been doing, and that helped some. And I lost another 20 pounds. I got down to 194 pounds, actually, from the highest that I know I weighed. But again, I know it was higher than that. I would guess I was about 325 based on...
That's a big drop.
Yeah. And that took about a year and a half. So the first 100 pounds I lost really quickly. And then the rest was a little bit more slow. And Mike got down to his ideal weight on this program.
So annoying when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mike's actually a very petite, very small boned, tiny kind of guy. And he was actually, I remember buying him a pair of jeans, Levi's, with a 30-inch waist. And I was tiny. He looked great. And initially we both felt really good, but how we felt kind of started declining over time. And, I reached out. We were quite famous actually in the community because we actually, oddly enough, hit our 100-pound weight loss goal on the same day.
Wow.
Which is bizarre. But I had a lot more weight to lose than Mike. Mike started at 258 pounds and I was well over 300 pounds. And he got down to 152 pounds. So it was just a freak. Like we would get up and get weighed. We knew we were getting close to our 100-pound goal. And this company celebrated, 100-pound increments pretty lavishly, actually. You were invited to a banquet and, all kinds of gifts. And so we knew we were close and we'd been monitoring it quite carefully. And it was just one of those weird things where we ended up hitting that milestone on the same day. So we had met the owners of the company and the founders and the formulators, and we knew everybody. But when we started struggling and I started reaching out to these people for help, all of a sudden they didn't know who I was because they provided a solution for your body, but not your mind. It's kind of funny. I was on a podcast with them where they were following up on the 100-pound weight loss. And I was very honest with them about the emotional and mental turmoil, what I was going through and how difficult it was. They never aired that podcast because it wasn't the right message. I'm not the only one, right? I'm not the only one that went through this. And in fact, every single person I know who went to that company for weight loss primarily had the same results that I did. And very quickly the company would turn their backs on them.
Yeah.
The people who seem to have good lasting success with the products, and that's what they are, they're products, right? It's just sales. They were the people who hadn't been struggling with obesity their entire lives. They were the people who maybe hit a rough patch and had an episode of time as an adult where they struggled with their weight. It wasn't a lifelong battle for them. Those people seem to have good lasting results because, I think most of them had a better tool set. They just came to the whole thing with a better tool set on how to deal with everything that came, the emotions and the physical changes, and they were able to adapt more easily and get back to what they were before. Because for them, it was never about changing everything permanently. It was just about getting back to where they used to be, getting back to their baseline. But for the rest of us, it was really learning a new lifestyle. And it was one that wasn't sustainable. I don't know anybody who wants to drink 2 shakes a day for the rest of their lives. I honestly don't. I can remember all the supplements that we would take, just to balance things out, I don't know anybody who can do that long term. So when you start trying to figure out what it looks like once you wean off of those shakes, you initially go to 1 a day and then, oh, it's not too bad. Okay, fine. But now I don't really want to take these anymore. How do I transition to whole food? Most people don't do that successfully because they do not have that tool set. They haven't grown up in a way that enables them. None of us that have had obesity their entire lives, problems with obesity, grew up in a way where we were doing things correctly. It's so ingrained. You have to relearn. You have to replace what it is that you know or knew with something healthier. And they don't help you with that, unfortunately.
Yeah, because like you say, what it basically is a relatively, anyway, quick fix solution and a temporary solution. So that's only really ever going to work for, like you say, somebody who's had a temporary problem.
Yeah.
A recent problem.
Yeah.
Because you've got to go back to something.
You do, and it's kind of funny. So I said I started in January 2011, and this realization dawned on me in 2012. I started seeing that, the people who were kind of popular and famous in this company were on a yo-yo, like roller coaster diet. They would gain a lot of weight in between events, and the events were all live. So they would do this crazy binging where they would gain 30, 40, 50 pounds, and then they would do this crazy restrictive diet to lose it all back before the next event. And the only thing that would keep them from completely going off the rails and continuing their increased, obesity and gain was the fact that they would continually buy their tickets for the next event, and they knew they were non-refundable. So they had to go, and they didn't want people to see that they had gained weight. It was the only thing that would keep them on program. And that struck me as really odd. But then I found myself doing the same thing. And I'm like, no, that's it. I'm done. I completely washed myself of the program and completely separated from the company. It's odd, though, because I still had people messaging me and emailing me and calling me for advice. So I was like, no, I'm sorry. You have to get with your person who signed you up. The company changed drastically, too, and you could tell that the focus really went from weight loss success stories to business success stories. So that might help you with your clue on which company this is. They really started focusing on business, and that makes sense, right? Because how do they get rich? By selling more and more and more. The people who help them sell more and more are the people who are good at the business side. So that became their focus, and I washed my hands of them. But during that time, we also moved to Texas, and I was actually at a pretty good weight when we moved here, and I was pretty happy. I was, just hovering around the 200 pounds. I was in a happy place, good weight, good mental space, but that was going to change drastically as we moved here. I had, so stress is something that's a trigger for me, and I don't handle it well. And again, it goes to that lack of control when I feel that it's something that I have to rely on somebody else. And moving here, I had actually worked out with my company that I was working with to allow me to work remotely. But there was an event that happened where it became really obvious that the person who was managing the office, the product that I was working on, cared more about maintaining friendships with the people than he did about the products or the company's well-being. And he made some really bad decisions. And when I brought it up with the manager, he kept on telling me my expectations were unrealistic. And he got a little upset with me because this was a challenge. I was challenging him to do something very uncomfortable. I sent out a resume, and I got a job immediately at a new company in Texas. I heard back the next day, and within 2 days, they had given me an offer. And I went in and I gave him my letter. And he cried. And I'm like, well, I told you, I wasn't hiding that this was going to happen from you. You were unwilling to do your job. And you showed me that you didn't respect me or my time or my team. You were more concerned about keeping friendships with the people that you managed than you were with the wellness of the entire team. So here, I gave him my letter of resignation. And when we moved, that was very difficult for me because as part of resigning, they asked me to stay on for the transition, which makes sense. So I agreed to 2 weeks because I was starting my new job right afterwards, right? So I agreed to 2 weeks, but they ended up asking me to stay on for an entire extra month, so 6 weeks. So I was doing two full-time jobs. And at that point, I just couldn't deal with the stress. And going back to this program that I had been on, it had really done a number on my hormones. And when I said I was dealing with emotional and mental issues, I had been seeing doctors for months and months and months, and they just kept on telling me I was getting older. I was 36. So I wasn't that old, but they kept on telling me it was a normal part of aging. When I got to Texas, the extra stress of having a new job and learning a new product and leading a new team, and within a month, my new company, so I was still doing both jobs. Within a month, the new company I was at had me leading all of their products, so 7 software programs. And it was too much, but they didn't trust anybody else. They wouldn't let me take vacation days. I didn't have any downtime. So the stress was so much that I couldn't sleep. My memory I just couldn't learn anything new. I had 0 short-term memory. And I finally got referred to a functional medicine doctor who happens to be my chiropractor now as well. But I initially reached out to him as a functional medicine doctor, and he asked me a bunch of, this questionnaire was 13 pages long. And at the end of it, he sent me home with a kit 24-hour saliva test and some other stool sample, type kits. And he ran a battery of blood tests and everything. And it came back that I had adrenal fatigue. And I had gained quite a bit of weight. And I think that's just honestly the hormonal mess that I was going through. I was about 240 pounds at that time, I think. So nothing crazy. Like I wasn't at my highest weight again. I hadn't gained it all back. But so he put me on a program, which was also shakes, actually. And you already know how much I love shakes at this point. I had done it for a while. But, we went through with it. Apparently, I had some parasites and some other things that needed to be taken care of. And there were some ingredients in this program that would help with that. So I followed it for about 3 months. And he kept on saying, my functional medicine doctor kept on saying, go as low carb as you can. Go as low carb as you can. So I kept on cutting out the carbs. And eventually I ended up keto. Then the lower and lower and lower I went on my carbs, the better and better and better I felt. And so I started Googling specifically low carb diets and found Maria Emmerich's site. This was the fall of 2013. It seems so weird to me that so much happened in such a short period of time. I started following keto to the best of my ability with the information that was available back then. And today, I think most people would consider that to be, if it fits your macros type of keto. Mm-hmm. But I reached out to Maria in January, and she has a program where she will recommend a supplement regime and specific diet macros for you. And it was the same kind of process. It was a really long questionnaire, and I provided her with my blood test results and all the test results that I had at that time. And she tailored a program for me. And, at that point I would consider myself as having started the recovery from the adrenal fatigue. So I literally had a flat line. Like they couldn't even measure my cortisol levels. And within a couple of days of switching to Maria's program, I actually slept like 6 hours one night. And I woke up the next day and I'm like, oh, wow, this is amazing. And within a couple of weeks, I was sleeping normally. And my memory started coming back and I was feeling better and I was excited and everything was amazing. I even joined the gym. I was so excited. And I hired a personal trainer because I knew if I didn't, I wouldn't go. And, things were actually really good. And I was looking up. Everything was looking up. And I was optimistic again. It's kind of funny. I was feeling so good, I actually applied for a new job and got it and started the whole process over again because I was crazy. So I started another yo-yo cycle there so I think I went down to 220-ish pounds, 230 pounds. I never got to like my goal weight. But one of the things that I tell people is it's so easy and it's so quick to forget how bad you used to feel. And you start thinking, I can have a little bit of this and I can have a little bit of that.
Yeah.
And before you know it, your habits are the same as they were before and you're on the same track as you were before. So I was still on a yo-yo diet, essentially. It's just that most of the time I was low carb now. But, still struggled with the mental part of it. And I knew, and I think this might be a good segue. I knew for me that the challenge was my mind. I was holding myself back. I was sabotaging myself. And I had to figure out why.
That's where we leave Kelly for today. So make sure to tune in next week to listen to the rest of her story. To get the resources and links from this show, please go to ketowomanpodcast.com/episodes. Please share this podcast with as many people as possible by sharing one of my links or just taking a screenshot of an episode that you enjoyed. Reviews really help raise the profile of the podcast, which gets it in front of more people, but also helps me attract a wide variety of guests. So please take a minute to leave a review on whichever podcast app or platform you like to listen on. It doesn't go unnoticed by me, the people who regularly like, share and comment on my posts. Your support really does mean the world to me. Thank you. Are you enjoying this podcast? Help me make more episodes and videos by making a pledge at my Patreon page, patreon.com/Keto Woman, or simply hit the support button on the Keto Woman podcast website. Don't forget to join in the fun on the Keto Woman podcast Instagram and Facebook pages, and Daisy_Keto Woman on Twitter. Are you my next extraordinary woman? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you would like to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomanpodcast.com. This week's end quote is from John Shedd. A ship is safe in a harbour, but that is not what ships are built for. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.